Welcome to the Blue Room here. It's the weekly show. We are on hot mic as well. Thanks for everybody tuning in for that. I hope everybody's doing all right. We're going to continue our 2012-2013 Odyssey a little bit later on. Chapter 5 of this season review. We'll get stuck into that a little bit later. But plenty to talk about first and foremost. Mark Mosey's here this week. That's the big news. Thanks for taking the time also to come on, Mark.
If you deliver consistent goods like me coming on every week, that it kind of spoils the high quality value that is offered. So I think short, sharp spells of this is what the people really need.
It's like waiting for Boris Johnson to do one of those briefings, Mark, isn't it?
Oh, God, that's a harsh comparison.
Quite the character reference from Dave there. Thank you, mate.
People want the main event, mate. So worth the wait, isn't it? Sadly, not in some cases.
I wouldn't have blamed you for getting up and going there, Mose, to be fair, yeah. But yeah, we need to talk about all things top. We've actually got a bit of news today, so I thought we could start off on that. According to loads of different reports that we've seen today, Everton have put a new contract on the table for Leighton Baines. Looks like it's going to be another year at the football club. And it was sort of muted this, Dave, a while ago that this was going to happen. You know, I think we had a few discussions on here about it. I think there were some people saying that, you know, maybe it's time to move on with this now, try and get someone younger in. But I think at a time in the summer where things are going to be uncertain, where the club aren't going to have a lot of money sloshing around, it just feels like a dead sensible move, doesn't it?
It does. I'm a little bit torn about it, to be honest with you. Not simply because I don't want Leighton Baines to stay. I think it's wonderful news that he's going to be with us for another year. It delays the agony that we're inevitably going to go through, I think, when he does ultimately hang up his boots. He says himself he's got no interest in staying in football as well. So we can sort of kiss goodbye him, sort of meandering around Goodison looking suave on the touchline. I think that's out of the question. I think he'll enjoy his retirement as he rightly should by doing his own thing, and that'll probably be something that doesn't involve public appearances because I think he's quite a shy lad at heart. I think he just likes to do his job and go home, and I think that's sort of the reason why we love him all the more for it. He's very, very casual, laid back character. But the other side of it that saddens me a little bit is that at the age, what is he now, 35, is it?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
35 years old, and he can still lay claim to being our best left back at the club. Now, I don't want to go on a Luca Dean sort of slagging parade here, but I feel as if his performances, certainly this season, have been so far removed from what we saw last season that you can genuinely say I think Leighton Baines is probably a contender in genuine football in terms for that left back slot right now. Maybe not on a weekly basis, but my point is, if you put him in that side at left back, as we saw in the fleeting appearances he's made this season, he does an adequate job, and one that Luca Dean should look at and think, I've got a 35-year-old fella here. Yes, he's a legend of the club, and yes, he was one of the best left backs in world football in his day. But Leighton Baines' day, in Luca Dean's mind, should be far gone, and he should be sitting there thinking, yeah, I should be head and shoulders above this lad, and it shouldn't even be a conversation of whether he's a contender or not. And I'm pretty sure in Carlo Ancelotti's head that Leighton Baines is definitely in his mind when he comes to selecting his best 11, and that shouldn't be the case, I don't feel, at the age of 35, and that's why it feels on that side of things, purely from a playing perspective and a performance perspective. Let's be honest, Leighton should be seeing out his football career on the bench. I don't mean to sound condescending to Leighton Baines, because I love the lad, I love the bones of him, but I think it's just an indictment of where we sort of are as a club. And normally I go off on one, Matt, you know me, on sentiment. I can't stand it when it comes to our club, but there's actually a football reason behind this, I feel, and that to me is a little bit of a concern given Luca Dean's form.
I think in the same sense, maybe you could flip what Dave said on its head there. And all right, Luca Dean's not hit the heights he did last season, but you look at all the figures and the metrics, and if you go down that route, you know, he's still creating a lot of chances. He still sets up a lot of goals in that sense. He's still been productive. And he might have dropped a bit below the level he was at last season, but you could sort of say this is as a positive for Leighton Baines that he's been able to still maintain those standards at this point in his career when he suffered with injuries and hardly played any games. I mean, we were both at Old Trafford that day when he started in that match where Everton played a mad formation with Mason Holgate in midfield, and we all sort of thought, oh no, it's going to be a tough day for him against someone like Daniel James, but he just breezed through it like it was nothing.
Feels like we've offered this deal to him for at least 5 or 6 years now. Like, and I want to see the June or July where we don't offer Leighton Baines this deal. I see where Dave's coming from in terms of his ability on a one-off match basis. I think if you have got a big game coming up, and regardless of the nature of the opposition, you feel pretty comfortable allowing Baines to take that mantle. I think when you start thinking about who is Everton's designated left back, you have to probably be a bit more progressive in terms of thinking about the future of that role. And clearly, we all know that Luca Dean is that. Albeit, I think if you perform so well in that first season, as you said, Dave, and then, do you know what, his performances probably haven't been that bad this season, but when you set yourself the standard, you open yourself up for criticism. And when there is
defensively, Mark, I think defensively he's been horrid at times, if we're honest. Going forward and the assists and the crosses and things, he's to an extent he's sort of stunted by the man who's in front of him, and that's changed. And we've had maybe Bernard out there as well who hasn't hit the heights either. I understand that there's mitigating circumstances there, but defensively he's been really poor in my eyes.
It's ironically exactly the same thing that we'd say about Baines. I think we all the iconic game in the recent memory for Leighton Baines for me is the home friendly against Valencia, when I think Rodrigo generally tore us apart, but I don't know who was out on the right hand side that day for Valencia, but even the week before the season, it made you think this is just really not going to work. I think that was actually the season that Luca Dean came in. And I think Baines started the first game at Wolves, correct me if I'm wrong, and then gradually I think we all got used to the fact that was not going to be his role. Spot on in terms of being able to create that partnership with the left midfielder, and that is clearly so important. And I think it's testament to Luca Dean that he's been able to be so impressive with such a variety of partners, when in reality you look at Leighton Baines' Everton career, and much of the success that he had is based on the fact that he had someone like Steven Pienaar ahead of him, who was clearly a quality player, but also on a consistent basis. And I think we've forever said that being impressive at Everton is all about creating those partnerships around the field. And certainly Baines and Pienaar has always been the iconic one of those. So for what Everton need and for what Leighton Baines needs, I think this is just the perfect decision. It's clearly, as we've said, he's not going to be progressing into sort of future football roles. You don't really see him. I'm not naively talking about a love affair with the club, but you don't really picture him going on to create sort of a new Leighton Baines at another football club. I think instinctively you like to think that Everton is probably the end of it from a playing point of view for Baines. And where he goes from there, I can only imagine our own man about town, Paddy Boylan, just following him up and down Bold Street. All I really see from beyond football.
Yeah. What coffee are you getting, Leighton? What coffee are you getting, Leighton?
I still can't believe he can't live that down. The times when he's been able to meet him on certain occasions, and he's just ended up like a teenage girl when presented with Justin Bieber and just ran out of there screaming and crying.
Well, didn't we have a conversation where me and Paddy both said that we wouldn't go up and speak to him, whereas you said you definitely would?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to, listen. You're a human being at the end of the day, and I'm someone of stout professional integrity, as you know, Matt. When I did get the opportunity to do so at the Echo Arena at a boxing event a few years ago, I didn't shy away. I ended up making some really cringy joke to him, actually, and felt embarrassed by the whole experience. But that's another matter.
What was the joke?
I think I said this. Basically, him and Ryan Taylor. I was ringside covering the box, and I think it might have been, Tony Bellew's match against BJ Flores, where all the David Hay stuff kicked off, and Leighton and Ryan Taylor were sitting next to me on the front row. Sort of, obviously, they blagged away in on a couple of complimentary tickets along with the press. And I just turned around and I was like, wow, it's Leighton Baines. I said, Leighton, is it okay if I get a quick picture with you? No, it's not the done thing. And he said, yeah, no problem, mate. And if you remember, I think it was when he was on his one of his very, very rare injuries. He was out for a few weeks, I think. And I said, does the gaffer know you're playing out tonight? Ha ha ha. And
God.
basically dashed me dreams, and he went, yeah, there's your photo, mate, and just sat back down. So I struggled to make eye contact with him for the rest of the evening, to be honest. I didn't feel
pied you off then.
What?
He pied you off properly there.
No. He was lovely, but my joke, I just felt like, when you go run through your head what you'd say to people, and funnily enough, because like I said to you before, I think he's a little bit of an introvert, Leighton. And he's one of the very, very few who I didn't get to interview in sort of my time at Radio City. So I was sort of there as a fan and sort of in that capacity. So it runs through your head what you're going to say to someone when you're going to meet them. And mine was an absolute car crash.
Knowing your music taste and Leighton Baines' interests of extracurricular activities in music, he did not want to have any formal conversation with you. So,
Mark, I think he was on the verge of getting in the ring instead of having to answer questions from me, to be honest.
Leighton, what's your album?
Show me your music. Show me your playlist, Leighton. What the hell's all this? Never heard of any of these bands. Go away.
Oh dear. Where's your Kelly Clarkson, Leighton? Come on. Oh dear me. Yeah, well, he's going to be around for another year. So if you see him around town, Dave, you can apologise for that joke.
It was worthy of an apology.
The steer clear of music, and you'll be fine, I reckon. Yeah. Leighton Baines looks like he's going to be around for another year, which is good. Let's get back on with this season review then. I feel as though this is going to be, we're going to end it. I lost today. It's going to be not a loss, because it's been enjoyable, to be fair. Really, it's been a really interesting season to look back on and go through with a fine-tooth comb. Obviously, last week, Mark, you weren't here. We finished after the Wigan game. Everton obviously lost 3-0 at home. And I told, I don't know if you listened back to the podcast, but I told everyone about how you missed the first half, didn't you? And deciding whether to turn up or not when you saw it was 3-0.
Yeah, obviously the one major mistake I made that day was actually making the effort to get to the game. And I think the second major mistake would have been making even more effort to come and talk about it last week. So hence the absence. But yeah, I was, as you said, Matt, working on the day till 1 o'clock. And I think it was a 12:15 or a 12:30 kickoff. So I'd just about figured out that if I put my foot on the gas and used a few contacts in the ground, I'll be able to get there at half time. Walked into sort of the players' entrance, and I always remember walking past the changing rooms, and I was with a family friend who was a security guard, and I thought he said he'll get me out the tunnel, walk round to my seat in the park end, and watch the chaos unfold in the second half. And as I walked through the tunnel, Victor Anichebe was just coming off the pitch and back into the changing room. And I don't think I actually said anything to him on a day, but I just thought we're pinning our hopes on getting to an FA Cup semi-final on someone who's probably not the greatest person to do that for. I think if you're going to look at someone to get you 4 second-half goals, with all...
Did he come on at half-time that day, did he? Yeah.
Not the guy, but he was just stripping his top off and getting ready to come on, yeah. But there was countless points at different junctions on the M53 listening to Radio City that gave me the opportunity to get off that motorway early. But I think I'd just gone past my last junction when the third went in, and I thought, you know what, I'm in it now. I'd never forgive myself if I was there if I was not there for the 3-3 turnaround. But we all know how that unfolded. But yeah, the game in general, do you know what? I honestly don't remember much about what I saw, because obviously you lads will be scarred by what unfolded in those 4 bizarre minutes. But it didn't strike me as the type of second half where there was that sort of gung-ho mentality and that general feeling that you're going to get back into it. And I know the scoreline very much instigates how you feel about that. And you never really know if you were able to get one back before the hour mark, maybe everything changes. But it was just a kind of a a sad decline and a bit of a summary about how those last couple of years have been, because I know we'll go on to speak about Moyes and everything that unfolded at the end of this season, but it just felt like everything was that little bit of a step too far. And this is certainly a campaign where that shouldn't have been the case. You know, Reading, Wigan, this was essentially the FA Cup run that was gifted to David Moyes as a parting shot to gift Everton a trophy.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we weren't able to do that was just kind of the major summary of everything that he'd struggled to do at the club, and probably would have struggled to do even if he had stayed. And we know that whether it was a mentality thing with him personally, I think the job that he went into it at Manchester United was clearly always going to be a very difficult one. But I think from an Everton perspective, there was always that general feeling that this game epitomised how Everton were really never going to achieve anything under him. And that's not to negate everything that he'd done for us in the league, but it just felt like that last final step of bringing silverware home was always out of reach.
Yeah, and it was his last chance, because if we're going to come to talk about, he was announced he's going to move to Manchester United. Sort of we were speaking before, we came on there and just looking at the last few games of the season, not too much going on that was eventful. Home win against Manchester City, which we briefly spoke about last week, Dave, in that Yelovich moment. Beat Stoke at home, beat QPR at home, beat Fulham at home as well, and then beat West Ham United on the last day at home. Away, a little bit scratchy, away wins for the end of the season. But one player who did want to mention, Dave, actually, who sort of came into his own at this point in the campaign, I think left us all very excited for the next season, was Kevin Mirallas. You think about that goal he scored against Stoke in an absolutely dire game, running half the length of the pitch. The week later, we go to Spurs and he scores another Jinkum run to put us 2-1 up, where we ultimately draw 2-2. With Gylfi Sigurdsson scoring a late equaliser for Tottenham, of all people. And then in that West Ham game, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail later, he scores twice in that one as well. And I think we'd seen that flash from him in the early part of the campaign, especially in that 2-2 Merseyside derby where he went off injured at half time. He'd had his fitness issues. He seemed to be in and out of the side, but from pretty much just going out the cup up until the end of this campaign, he put a really good run together. And I remember at the end of the season, while we were all focused on what was going on off the pitch with Moyes and who was going to come in, I remember being dead excited about what this lad was going to do the next season.
Yeah, I think, he was really he was a signing that was very un-Moyes-like. We've discussed this at length, Matt, about players Moyes signed, and it was in that last season, I think, and this is where I do wonder what would have happened had he stayed on. It was as we've spoken about at length, a squad that you looked at and thought, wow, this has got an X factor to it for once. This has got something that we can really cling on to and go forward with. It wasn't a bit of a throwback to the Moyes sides of old. It had flair, it had style, it had plenty of attacking intent.
Morales had sheer and pace as well, didn't he?
Exactly. Again, all of these facets he had to his game were things that we had longed for as Evertonians for the best part of the decade under Moyes. Obviously, we've discussed why that was the case, and it needed to be a workmanlike side. It was a side that needed to be that way for Everton to get points and win football matches. We couldn't afford to be as flamboyant as we were, particularly when Morales got there. We obviously had Pinar in there as well. There was plenty going on in that midfield area, in those wide areas that like we said, you sort of lament the fact we didn't have that striker, because obviously Yelovich was way off form that season. We didn't have that man other than Fellaini chipping in who could muster up a couple of goals, a scrappy goal, a finisher. We had it in bit parts. Everybody seemed to do it in cameo and fleeting ways. I think you had Naismith who come up with an important goal. Fellaini was very much the talisman of this season, and it felt like Morales was the X factor we needed. He was the player that was going to take us forward and be the man that again became that talismanic figure post Fellaini. And I think by and large in that Martinez first season, he did actually go on to do that. I think I do have a problem with certain Blues who I think completely write him off on his time at the football club because of the way it ended and because, let's face it, he stayed far too long. But he was brilliant for us when at his peak. I'd say 2 or 3 seasons of Kevin Morales, he was outstanding. And then he became a player, I think, that it looked to be a personality trait with him, that it was only when it was suited that he would turn up, when it suited him. And I think
that transfer rumours around him, didn't he, as well? And that sort of, I think, feel like that knocked his focus more than anything, to be honest.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that there were things in his head that weren't as straightforward as they were when he first joined the club, and it was just very much you're just going to go out and express yourself and play. And I think he should be looked upon a little bit more fondly than he is by many Evertonians. Obviously, there's a lot of slating about him when we think about towards the end, the back end of him playing. You think even in the pre-season with Marco Silva, was that season before last? I think it was. He was and I do remember it was quite funny because he was regarded as one of our star performers in the pre-season because nobody else was really doing anything before we signed Richarlison. So, yeah, I like Kevin Morales. I liked what he did for us. There could have been so much more because I think he was that talented. I think he'll look back on his career with one of a little bit of regret. And I look upon him with a little bit of regret because I think he could have done so much more for us. But yeah, I mean, towards the end of that season, he was electrifying, and it really made you think, if we can keep this lad fit, he gives you a chance of scoring goals in every game you play.
That West Ham game was great. I don't know if either of you remember it, but we scored quite early on. Morales got both, didn't he? Did you say, Matt?
Yeah, he scored both.
The first one at your end,
the first half.
Back heel from Pienaar.
Park end, weren't they?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so he scored quite early on, and even at 1-0, sort of coming up to midway through the second half, you just never really got the impression that we were ever going to lose the game. But it felt like the whole affair was just kind of petering away, and the emotion of what we all knew was David Moyes' last game was kind of just faltering into nothing, and the whole atmosphere just dissolved. And it was almost as though the crowd recognised that this had all gone really flat. And everyone just picked themselves up, players, fans. I remember there was just like choruses of singing from all around the ground for seemingly no other reason than just to mark what had been such a fond tenure to look back on. And I think Dave's spot on in terms of how people look back at Moyes. And I mean, that last half hour against West Ham, where obviously Morales scores again, it just showed how his teams, from a flair point of view, which you wouldn't necessarily associate with him, were able to just turn it on so quickly. I mean, the UEFA Cup runs, the home games against Bran, demolishing teams like Sunderland, it's probably still to this day the best football that I've seen Everton play, and I include that Martinez first season. I think that we'll obviously look at where ultimately this went wrong for David Moyes. And I know that the decision was his to step away, but it just felt like as though when he tried to do too much or something that was outside of his comfort zone, it all started to unravel slightly. I mean, we talk about Martinez's first season now as being the one where we had the perfect blend of David Moyes' defensive stability, but also a little bit more flair from obviously people like Lukaku and Roberto Martinez himself. But you look back at this season and remember that in January, we went something like 16 or 17 games where we both scored and conceded. And I'm pretty sure that is still a Premier League record. Yeah. And you obviously later on in that season, you talk about the home games against Stoke and against Fulham and against Manchester City. And we were able to eventually put some clean sheets back together. It always felt like Moyes had that in his locker. He felt that when he was good, it existed in spells and in extended runs. And then when it got quite bad, it felt like Everton hit a rut, and it was sort of always back to the drawing board about how we get this out. But you almost felt like he tried to do a little bit of something different or more attacking with the team that season. He tried to bring in people like Kevin Morales, who were not stereotypically David Moyes players. And you start to see the sort of defensive fragility come in at different parts of that season. And I think it's a strange one where we always put that on Roberto Martinez in terms of the defensive nature just totally going. But even if you look back a season before, the shift had kind of already started to happen. And I think a lot of that was due to the emphasis on not only David Moyes to change, but there was an emphasis on Everton to keep up with an evolving top six. These were teams like Liverpool, and obviously we had Spurs primarily, who were always up there with us in terms of being more attacking and just demolishing the other 14 teams in the league and being part of that breakaway. And I think Everton was so desperate to be part of that we kind of got lost in that whole evolution of what we were meant to be. And I think we kind of sold our souls to what was meant to be this sort of fluid, dynamic style of football, which we only really ever achieved for one season. But I think Martinez was probably capable of doing that. And he had the sort of technical nous to do that and play that style of football. Whereas with Moyes, it always kind of felt like he was pushing himself too far. And I think there was elements of that at United and definitely at Real Sociedad as well.
Yeah, we'll come on to talk about David Moyes now then. Like we said, we just sort of brushed through the end of the campaign there. Not much to talk about really, apart from that. There's a 0-0 Merseyside derby in there as well.
I'll take that.
That was on the 5th of May. I mean, yeah, absolutely made. I think we played all right that day, actually. We probably should have won. But I think that was the game where the draw confirmed.
That had the disallowed goal.
Yeah, it was, yeah. And it was, by drawing, we confirmed we were going to finish above them for another season. So that was nice as well, I suppose. But it wasn't the best game. We played all right, but nothing to write home about, really. So that game was on the 5th of May at Anfield. That was the third to last game of the season. On the 8th of May, Man United confirmed that Sir Alex Ferguson was retiring as their manager after 26 years. And then a day later, on the 9th of May, it was confirmed that David Moyes was going to be taken over at Man United from the end of the season, starting on the 1st of July on a 6-year contract, ending 11 years at Goodison Park. Do you remember? I suppose it's one of those seminal moments for Evertonians, isn't it, Dave? Do you remember getting the news? And I think it was pretty early on, wasn't it? After it was confirmed Ferguson was going to be leaving, the general consensus and the general mood in the media was that there's no way that David Moyes isn't getting this job.
Yeah, it felt inevitable, didn't it? We spoke on the last episode about how there was a point in that season where I felt it was definitely going to happen much earlier on when he wouldn't commit to saying anything about the following season, when he used to be quite keen on talking about those things. He used to talk about planning for next season quite openly and what Everton needed to do to progress, and he just wasn't playing ball when he was asked those questions at press conferences, and then this come about, and it was a really difficult moment to take. Really, you couldn't believe it. It was quite surreal, the fact we'd had somebody for the best part of our adult lives, if we're honest, and our late teen years in school, who had managed and taken this football club forward, and a lot of people, and it's laughed at a lot, I think, by other fans when we celebrated at the time Moyes' achievements at the football club. I think there was a little bit of a, well, you haven't won a trophy, and how far have Everton come under Moyes? But I think that's something only really Evertonians will know and be able to fully appreciate it in what he did for us. The way it ended is very regrettable. He said that, he's come out and said that since. I was fortunate enough to sit next to him for the best part of a full 90 minutes when we sponsored that Jack Riding charity football match a couple of years ago. And he was sort of quite open about how it ended at the football club and what he hoped to go and do next and things.
It's interesting you say that, Dave, though, because at the time, in the context of this season as a whole, it didn't feel regrettable. It sort of felt like, everyone's wishing him well. And, that West Ham game, there's a lot of people with tears in their eyes that, when he was waving people off. It all felt like very nice, and it felt like we were saying about the previous season that we maybe felt as though it was the right time for him to go. It just felt as though everyone was ready for this and ready for this to move on.
Well, it was amicable at the time. We can remember him, Phil Neville, and Tim Cahill doing a lap of honour around Goodison, which was quite bizarre when you look back on it, because obviously Tim didn't get the send off he deserved from the previous season. Neville was obviously needed to be put out to pasture at the time, given his performance in that Wigan game. He was also one of the hot favourites for the job as well, if you remember.
Yeah, of course.
And was reportedly, I think he was interviewed at the time. I'd love to know this. It's one of the great untold stories of the last few years that hasn't really come to pass in anybody's book or anything, but I'd love to know who the shortlist was. I'd love to know who they spoke to. Alan Stubbs was mentioned.
Malky Mackay.
Yeah, Big Dunk was mentioned. There were a few, and ultimately, I know obviously we might well do a follow-up episode on this, but when Roberto Martinez was announced, I was pretty underwhelmed at the time. Not because he just won the FA Cup, which is exactly what we needed, but because he got relegated, which I thought was a dangerous ploy from us. But with Moyes, it was very nicey. I think the real bitterness come from many Evertonians, and to their credit, they said this from the start. There was a discerning group of voices that were saying, well, he's left us high and dry here. We're not going to get any compensation from him. It's clearly been in the works for a long time. And they went a little bit further and would sort of blame that reason for why we didn't do so well towards the end of that campaign, despite having such a decent squad. So I'd say, but like you say, I think in the most part, many were, well, yeah, it's the end of a sort of adventure here. Perhaps it's been a couple of years too late. In hindsight, I think that's probably correct. He should have gone a little bit earlier. I think it would have been the option for many fans for him to go, perhaps even as early as after the 2009 final against Chelsea, and certainly the 2012 semi-final, I think, was a straw that broke the camel's back moment for him, because you thought that he arrived at this level that we needed to be at perennially, and yet he fell at that final hurdle once again, despite having everything in Everton's favour. We were gifted the goal early on in that game, and we threw it away. We bottled it, and it's a shameful thing to have to say, but Everton lost that game. Liverpool didn't win it in that 2012 semi-final, and something that I think it will stick for a while until we finally get over that gargantuan gap that we have with them now, and maybe try and beat them when it matters. But alas, that didn't happen, and he stayed on. And listen, he still did a fine job. If you were told now that Moyes knew 2 years in advance that he was going to Man United, and Alex Ferguson had sort of been tapping him up for that sort of thing, I don't particularly mind, because I still think he gave Everton everything to Everton, and I can't blame him. And again, at the time, I was one of the people who was saying you can't blame him for taking this opportunity. Moyes might well have grown into being an Evertonian, but in managerial terms, how often do you get offered a job of that magnitude? You can't turn it down. And I always refer to a point in Leon Osman's book. It's a really good read, very underrated read, I think, where he talks about an occasion when they all met up, I think, on the East Lancs, Holiday Inn it might have been, and there were 5 of them there. I think it was obviously Moyes.
How glamorous!
Well, I think it was like Leighton Baines, Ozzy himself, Tim Howard, maybe one more. Can't really remember who that was. Who basically Moyes bounced the idea off, and this is a point which really started to annoy me and grated on me in my naive youth. I was really angry about that. I was thinking, how small time's this that we've got our manager who's been with us over a decade, basically saying to everybody at a meeting, to the club's senior staff and players, what do you think about me going to Man United? And I'm almost saying, don't take this as verbatim, but I'm pretty sure in that book, a lot of the players are like, well, you've got to do it. And they were happy for him. That sticks a little bit with me. Simply because, albeit it's the old narrative with Moyes, isn't it? These things are true. When he used to say things like, Everton have done great to finish 7th, and maybe that's the highest we can do. They're probably facts. In fact, they are facts, because that's what will go on to happen. Regardless of how true it is, he and both they shouldn't be saying things like that if they hold Everton in the esteem that we all do and did. So that stunk a little bit for me, and left a little bit of a sour taste.
What was your overriding emotion, Mose, when you found out that Moyes was going? Was it just acceptance? Were you a bit gutted, or?
You hit the nail on the head when you said everyone was ready for it. I think it's probably slightly too harsh to say that it had all got stale and we were stagnating a little bit. I think when you use words like that, you kind of think the football was absolutely dreadful week in, week out, and it absolutely wasn't. As I've already said, it kind of just felt that, probably not from a stylistic point of view in terms of how we played, but just in terms of where you wanted your club to eventually end up. We knew the job that David Moyes was brought in to do, and so successfully did. I think if anyone asks you what David Moyes did for Everton, you only need look at the game the week before he took over and the type of football club that we were. And albeit it was a bit of a slog in the first couple of years, and there was a couple of dreadful seasons, and I think it probably got very close to David Moyes being sacked himself at the Etihad when we got absolutely wrecked on the last day of the season. And I think by definitely his own admission and by all of the fans who'd known Everton for the years previous to that year in particular, we knew that this was not going to be a snap turnaround in fortune. It was always going to require someone in the ilk of Moyes to come in and do a 10-year job. And I think the mistake that we probably made when Moyes left is expecting that would be the case again. I think in particular, whenever we look for a manager, even now, I want someone who's going to come in and build his own dynasty at the club for another 10 or 15 years and then ride off on a chariot of glory like Sir Alex Ferguson did with all of his trophies clanking off the back of the van. And it just doesn't happen like that. And I think that was, unfortunately, it was both David Moyes' time and Everton's time to realise what modern football was. And I think it was a perfect time for us to split because from Everton's point of view, at that stage, in my mind, we had very little to lose. Even if David Moyes was to go, I think he built such a stable core of the club that there was no way that we were going to get, I know it's easy to say in hindsight, there was no way we were going to get dragged into sort of relegation battles. I didn't see Everton regressing years and years because David Moyes had left. I think there was a sense of opportunity about the club and where it could go with a different set of hands. And I know, Dave, you didn't look too well on this. I probably looked on Roberto Martinez's appointment with a great deal of more optimism. I appreciate that was probably naive from a league point of view, but I think when you look at what David Moyes had built into Everton, it was the consistent points basis of getting to a certain stage in the league to guarantee some form of stability. Whereas Roberto Martinez just added that bit of edge. Maybe we'd finish 5 or 10 points less, but we get that little bit of cup glory. And obviously that all came from the fact that we'd just seen the guy lift a trophy. But I think we'd seen a David Moyes in the March of his final season, for example, getting knocked out of the FA Cup by Wigan in what I would probably say now is one of Everton's most disappointing results of the last 20 years. And he won Manager of the Month that month. And I think that
I did not know that.
Everything about the guy suggested that he was capable of doing that sort of week to week to get Everton into a 6th or 7th position. But was he ever going to be that guy? And as much as we were all thankful, and I remember being emotional on that West Ham game because it would be very callous of any Evertonian to forget what he did for us. I think that the progression of that team in 10 years is remarkable. But there was also that sense of the fact that we all needed it. I was a little bit happy for him to go to Manchester United because I didn't really hold anything against him personally or that club. And I think that I am, in a bitter and twisted way, I am quite happy that it didn't work out for him because I think by his own words, and David Moyes used to consistently say this about footballers and staff and anyone who was associated with Everton, and I think it was in particular at a time where Stephen Pienaar had been linked with moves away and obviously he'd come back. And he himself said that people very rarely leave this football club and go on to achieve great things or don't regret it or don't want to come back at a certain stage. And he was proven right with people like Pienaar. And I think if you were to ask him years on, I don't think he'd have done this on the verge of being sacked by Man United because I think he, by his own admission, is quite a stubborn guy. But he would say that he never really achieved the heights that he himself had done at Everton. And I think it's quite ironic in a way that he kind of prophesized his own peak being at Everton because he'd seen how that club takes hold of people.
And he was, let's not forget, a few months ago, he was desperate to come back and take the job again before Carlo Ancelotti became available.
I just want to come back on Mark's point there about Everton and Moyes both being ready to sort of part company because it's really interesting. I completely agree with that. And I think it's right, but I also feel that on the outside, if you're spectating this from the outside, there's an argument to say that neither were ready or prepared for what followed.
Yeah,
simply because Everton was still the football club that Moyes took over, in obviously not on the pitch in terms of squad depth and how good we were, but they were still the football club, I think, infrastructure-wise, that he took over in 2002. Moyes himself was probably still the manager that he was in the season we finished fourth, and he took that to Man United mistakenly, naively, and ultimately I feel as if that probably contributed to his downfall. I remember finding out from friends who are Man United fans, one of the biggest mistakes they feel he made was he immediately dismissed most of their backroom staff as soon as he went in, because he felt he needed to make a profound statement that he wasn't going to sort of hang on the coattails of what Sir Alex Ferguson had done.
Clean break.
Exactly, and he wanted to influence that football club himself. Now, I bet you right now, if you were to put a gun to his head, he would say that was an error, that was a genuine mistake, because he had people there like Mike Phelan. I think he had the goalkeeping coach that he really, really loved. I can't remember his name. Who basically made David De Gea into what he was. And even though that Man United side, now we look back and laugh and think, how on earth did that win a Premier League title the last year of Ferguson's reign? I agree that it obviously was the end of an era, and probably it's the ideal time for Ferguson to bow out. There was no way he was going to get any more from that squad. You had Van Persie, who had, I think, 18 months, who was brilliant, but obviously he was aging at that point as well. Plays like Danny Welbeck, Adnan Januzaj, who...
Rooney was unsettled, wasn't he, that summer as well? There's a lot of talk about him going. Yeah.
That was the United, the Man City thing, wasn't it, when he signed his sort of last bumper deal?
No, that was a few years before.
Or was that?
There's just talk about him going. Like, there's that famous shot of him and Ferguson, wasn't there, when United lifted the trophy and Ferguson like pats him on the shoulder and he just sort of blanks him a little bit. I think he'd fallen out of favour there.
Yeah, and I feel as if that when Moyes ends up going there, he does have that naivety about him. There's obviously that infamous photo of him sitting on the desk with the Man United mouse mat and all that, and loads of people. I think it was when the memes were actually on fire and getting created. It was like people have put.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, and then from an Everton perspective, obviously we were about to enter the unknown in appointing a manager sort of postmodern, and the Martinez one, like Mark says there, the thing that petrified me about him was that shocking defensive record that he had at Wigan. It's interesting, Mark, we were talking about this last week, that Everton leaked goals in this season.
Yeah.
Yet Martinez's biggest critics seem to say that he got the remnants of a great Moyes defence, and that's essentially the foundation of why we did so well in his first season. But we as we've gone through this season to a fine-tooth comb, you actually realise, well, no, that defence was leaking goals. It wasn't as solid as everybody thinks, because I think rather lazily people would say, well, Moyes was in charge, the defence was obviously really good. That particular season must have been one of our worst for goals conceded. So I feel as if Martinez deserves a little bit more credit for his influence on the defensive side in that first season. And then just to conclude, really, I think when Moyes makes that step to United, Everton, I don't think backroom-wise, board-wise, are really ready to take this club forward. I feel as if that 13-14 season is such an anomaly that it feels as if more and more that we struck lucky. Everything came together. It seemed like a meeting of sort of great circumstance for many people. Martinez being one, the arrival of Lukaku being the other. That felt like, to me, it wasn't sustainable. And I know it's very easy to say that now, but again, I think we've missed the boat on so many occasions. After the Martinez first season was a huge one. We had a real chance to capitalise on a superb season, our highest ever in regards to points. And we basically, I think we signed De La Feu permanently, and maybe had a Mo Besic, maybe. There wasn't that many players in terms of income.
No, De La Feu came back the next summer, didn't he? He went to Sevilla that summer, and
that's
then we signed Samuel Eto'o and Ron as well.
Yeah. Now, I've always said this about our loan moves. Getting loan players in is great, and if they hit the ground running like they did in that season, every one of them to a man was superb in 13-14. But you basically then have to spend a lot of money to simply stand still, and that was never fully appreciated, I don't think. And then
That's
Moyes.
another thing Moyes did well, wasn't it, Dave? The players we got in a loan tended to come back and sign for us, or they come back again further down the line as in another deal. And he was good at, I think, getting those players in. And I think P&R, we had a fee, and we could meet, and it was the same with Arteta. They were both about £2 million each. So he was very savvy when it came to those deals. And
go on, sorry.
I was just going to say, it was interesting what you said there in regards to Everton didn't really feel ready for Moyes' departure. And I think if you look back at that time, that summer 2013, it feels to me, and I've got no stats or I've done any research in regards to this, but it feels to me about the time where most clubs in the top end of the Premier League table were going towards that director of football model. And let's not forget, most of those clubs at the top end of the league hadn't had a manager in place for 11 years beforehand. And I think what you've got now in the modern game is you've got the role of a manager so different. And Everton had a manager who'd been at the football club for 11 years and done pretty much everything. We'd done transfers, he'd done training, he was in charge of pre-season. He was in charge of absolutely everything at the football club. And when you take that fella away, say what you want about him, and he's spoken about his flaws and all that sort of thing. When you take someone away, you sort of got his hand in every aspect of the football club. That's going to leave a massive void, isn't it? And you think about now where you've got effectively a coach in Carlo Ancelotti, you've got a director of football in Marcel Brands. It'd be a little bit different, albeit we haven't had that stability. But I think Moyes was just all-encompassing across the football club. So I can sort of get why eventually after that first season under Roberto, the things just started to eke away and erode away a little bit.
Yeah, because all they knew was to basically give him what Moyes did. There was no other model for us to go to. There was no other reference point where we thought, well, hang on, we're bringing in a young, wet behind the ears manager in terms of not being able to keep clean sheets for one example. Yet we're going to give him everything from picking the team that transfers to what colour tiles we have at Finch Farm. That's what Moyes had. I feel as if it was probably naively and lazily at boardroom level, give him carte blanche to do what he wants as well. In the first season it worked, and Bill Kenwright and everybody else in that boardroom must have been looking at each other thinking, we've struck gold here and we look really, really good, despite not really having a plan in mind of getting Everton in a transition from a sort of one manager perspective to one that is sort of much more fit into a modern football way.
Yeah.
And that's what Mark says. It was us as fans, I think, who were ready for Moyes to go. The football club itself, somewhat of a different matter.
Yeah, I think it's crazy that you mentioned the impact and the opinion from outside the club on Moyes leaving. And I think when you look back at it now, as football fans outside of the Everton bubble, they must have thought, what on earth are you doing? And why do you want this guy to move on? But I think both an Everton fan group and David Moyes himself, it was almost a necessity that he left. I think in order to remain relevant, David Moyes obviously had to take that opportunity. And I think when we say that us as a club were ready for this to happen, I think we were just ready for the risk. I think we'd gotten to the point whereby the dice had to be thrown because they've been left alone for so long. I think
Mark, weren't we? We were bored.
Yeah, that's it. And you can't explain to a football fan who isn't so embedded in this how much that affects you on a week-on-week basis and how much you just need change. And as much as you don't do that callously and say, oh, we'll take relegation if it brings us success one day, it doesn't have to be to those extremes. But I think everyone was just ready for something a little bit different. And obviously we wanted to be positive, but it was a requirement that he left almost. I know that sounds crazy, but he obviously had to do it. But we just had to find out what post-Moyes Everton looked like. And for so long, as you said, Dave, it was just fantastic.
Yeah, it was.
I'm just going to quickly put a question out on this last night on Twitter. Ask some people's thoughts on it. If you want to make a point in any of these, lads, just jump in. I'm just going to rattle through them. Peter Needham has said, this in regards to Moyes leaving, I was happy about it then, and I'm happy about it now. For all he did for us, he and his football was largely limited. He never struck me as a top six quality boss. And in the long run, we've ended up with Ancelotti. Peter Mack, cheers for getting in touch.
I think there's a bit of a gap there, Matt, between it and Ancelotti. If only we could close that 5 years down, I'd be happy with that, and I'd agree with Peter.
I admire Peter's positive spin on it there, to be fair, in that regard. Peter Mack has said, at the time, I was okay with it because I felt like we'd stagnated. But I remember panic kicking in after the West Ham game, because all we'd known for 11 years was Moyes. Hated the way he was when he first went to Man United, but feel that he's always spoken fondly of Everton since and got a lot of time for him. And David Moyes said, responding to that, I felt embarrassed for us. It confirmed the Man United feeder club narrative that had driven me nuts for a decade. Those perceptions remain hard to shake, no matter how much money you splash. If they are linked with one of our players, your heart sinks. That's something that has always stuck to us, hasn't it, Mark, to be fair? And even since Moyes left, we've gone back to that Man United well in regards to players.
Yeah, I think it irks me when it comes to players, but I think there was a sense of realism about the Moyes move, and that's not us as Evertonians lying down and accepting this. But regardless of what you think of the clubs in the modern day right now, we were echelons apart from what Man United have been, and I know that they were on the decline, but David Moyes left Everton, a decent Everton side, to go and manage the champions. That is not, for me, Everton lying down and allowing this. Just to touch on the first question that you asked, Matt, I think it referenced David Moyes' style, whilst also saying that he wasn't a top six manager. And I think he was probably the last manager I can think of whereby his style, in my eyes, was pretty impressive. I think a lot of people will harp back to his first 4 or 5 years, which had to be poor. We needed it to be poor so that we could progress in terms of results. But
don't forget, Mark, we still managed to finish 4th in those first few years as well,
playing pretty badly.
Yeah.
But I think I would look back on his tenure primarily at the latter years as being one that was stylistically pretty good, whilst also admitting that he was not a top 6 or 7 manager. And that wasn't necessarily because of the way the team played football against Stoke and Fulham at home. It was just because of the fact that he, from a managerial point of view, was never going to be the guy to push us into that top 5 or 6. I think that's where football managers take away the football and just purely become managers. We see so many managers since Moyes who are probably not the greatest in terms of being on the coaching field and literally being hands-on with players and moving them around the pitch in a way that someone like Marco Silva would have done. But they're able to step back and realise when you need to go and tell a ball boy to keep hold of the ball for 2 minutes, like Mourinho do, or just some element of snide behaviour that would eke an extra 10 or 11 points out of a season and propel your team from the nearly men of 6th or 7th into comfortable Champions League finishes. And as much as Moyes liked to tinker with sort of on-field tactics, he never struck me as a born winner. And I think history has probably told us that was right.
Well, he's not, if you're going to have a style over substance debate, David Moyes is going to come out pretty bad, isn't he, if we're honest, despite the fact that I think he deserves...
Not as bad as you say.
No, in here, Mark, I think that it's probably a little bit of a myth that his sides were poor, because if you look from probably 2010 onwards, maybe even 2009 onwards, that the side was pretty much, I feel, one that was built for modern day football. It wasn't really the 4-5-1 anymore. He tried a few different things. He started to inject some pace into the side, which we always seem to lack. He went after goal scorers in the transfer market. I feel it's a little bit harsh to sort of dub him as somebody who was a little bit of a dinosaur and could only play one way. I don't think he was a one-trick pony by any means. And some of our...
You've mentioned them already, Dave, in the show, Baines and Pienaar. The interplay that those lads put together. And I know that a lot of that was natural, probably relationship they had, and he complemented really well as players. But they were given license to flourish and license to link up and be creative in how they went about things. And you can't just have the license as well. You've got to be on the training ground with the manager putting the work in that sense as well. And we all hark back to those two linking up together. Yeah. Maybe people think about 13, 14, but Pienaar was probably a little past his best in that season. I think it was in those seasons you mentioned there, 2010, 2011, maybe when we got to the cup final as well, where him and Baines as a duo were fantastic, and they played some of the best, the best interplay we've probably ever seen at Goodison Park in our times going the match.
Well, I completely agree. That's a really good point. But I also feel, you can adapt that to most of that squad, Matt. If you look at the characteristics of a David Moyes typical transfer, he was limited in finances to the nth degree, as we know, all the way through to the end. It was a record transfer for Laney, was it? 15 million quid. I mean, I know we're talking almost 2 decades ago now, but that, if you say to a manager, you're going to be in charge of the club for 11 years and your record transfer is 15 million pounds, that's not great. That's, if you told that to a manager even at that time, they'd be like, yeah, I've got nothing to work with here. In the transfer market, he was outstanding. His conversion rate of player signings to them being successes was incredible. When you look at everybody to, from Lescott to Leighton Baines, Stephen Pienaar, there's a really lengthy list of players who were superb. But I just want to touch on that point, Matt, about he went from somebody who was hell-bent on buying versatile footballers who could adapt and play in a number of different positions to one who was a conventional football manager in the transfer market by buying players for particular areas, i.e. Kevin Morales. You can't ask Kevin Morales to do several different jobs across midfield. You can't ask Stephen Pienaar to do that. Yet these were the players that he was signing more and more of towards the end of his tenure, rather than the Lee Carsleys of this world, or the Tim Cahales of this world, or the Steve Watsons of this world. He was signing players built out and out for positions, and that shows. I think I'm actually having a little bit of an awakening myself here, thinking that he was pretty good in adapting his style to what the demands of the Premier League were. And then you have to look at his league placings for that to be shown. Finishing above Liverpool in consecutive seasons. Yeah, all right, it was 6th and it was 5th, whatever it is. But that means a lot to us as Evertonians, particularly when you adapt the modern day context to it and how far away we are from them. So I think we need to look back in general as a fan base on David Moyes as much more fondly than what we do.
Yeah.
What to say about buying players for specific positions, because he bought Billy Lettinov, who was the perfect number 10, and then never bought him.
Yeah, it did work the other way at times.
I'm not going to bite on that. I'm not even going to bite on that.
Forever stolen of the opportunity to truly appreciate the Russian prince.
Yeah, I thought Dave then was going to say as well that the pickles that we've got Carlo now. We should have got David Moyes back.
I know I'm far too.
Maybe it's director of football if it doesn't work out for Marcel. But
I am far too complimentary of a man that gives me nightmares before having to go and speak to him.
That's sort of been a theme though with this come back of the season. In regards to players and obviously the manager now. There's people you'd sort of look at and the name to be mentioned and you go, oh him, he was look back at how they left the club and the most recency bias, but the more you talk about them, the more you sort of think that a lot of these players in the main in this time gave us some pretty good memories, and maybe we should think a bit more fondly about them in that regard. Just read a couple more points out before we wrap up. Michael Blakey has said, I was fearful of the future. Would the players stay? Who would we get? Even though I thought he should have gone after the 2012 semi, when it suddenly happens, it's a massive shock. Dave Sullivan has said, I was ready to move on from Moyes, felt we were both ready to go our separate ways, played some great football under him, returned as a respectable Premier League side. I have zero ill feeling towards him. And last one, Jamie O'Neill. It's very easy in hindsight to criticise Moyes, but I think for a lot of proportion of fans who don't remember the 80s but can remember the 90s, he restored pride and a sense of respectability to the club. Why he didn't take the last step, others with greater resources haven't. So that's a very sensible way of looking at it, to be fair, in that regard. We've done it, Dave. And Mark sporadically as well.
The Odyssey is complete.
The Odyssey is complete.
Our fellowship's over.
So, well, I was just sort of thinking then, and I don't know if you just want to carry this on into the summer of 2013 and start from there.
Yeah, if we start it now, what are we? 3rd of June. I reckon we can box it off by September. And then...
I was thinking more the Olympics next year.
Yeah. But obviously, because it is such a fascinating time. We touched upon Martinez getting appointed there, and I think while we talk about that 2013-14 season a lot, we don't speak about that summer and all the things that were going on there. And the names like Malky Mackay and Mark Hughes and Phil Neville and whoever else was like, Alan Stubbs was linked to the job. So maybe we'll go from there as well. Sheeds as well, my word, yeah, theory me. But yeah, we'll if people let us know if you've got any other ideas. If not, we'll just carry on. We'll just keep on going until we catch up to the current.
And then we'll start on 1878.
No, we'll
it's
go.
Like going back.
We'll go into the future and see how miserable.
It's like going back and playing an old FIFA on career mode, and then you catch up. You go past the date in real life and just go beyond it. But no, really appreciate everyone listening. Thanks if you're tuning in a hot mic to this. And just before we wrap up, this podcast is, as always, sponsored by Pitch Sport. We continue to do lots of great stuff during the pandemic. I did a video for the Fan Time feature earlier today about Jean-Philippe Gbamin and Yerry Mina. Dearly me, those guys. The poor guys. Not going to be playing much in the end of this season. I know. Feel terrible for both of them. But yeah, do head over to the Pitch Sport app, download it, check out the content on there as well. Thanks very much today. Thanks very much to Mark. We'll speak to you again very soon here on the Blue Room.